In this news roundup of the week for 7th of October 2022. Ukraine continues to make advances as the world is newly alarmed about the potential nuclear war. The UK's brand new government sees more consequences from its self-sabotage, and EU members push back against the bloc's plans to reduce pesticides in the middle of a world food crisis. My name is Mallen Baker, this is the Mallen Baker Show. Last week, we saw Putin shift the phase of the Ukraine war into a new phase by formally annexing regions of the country currently under occupation. This was a device that allowed Russia to send its new conscripts to the area and potentially opened the way to Russia defending its gains with added ferocity, by which everyone read potentially nuclear weapons, since there's not much else unused. And since then, not very much. Ukraine has completely ignored the theoretical change and has continued to make significant gains in Kherson and Luhansk. The autumn rains will be turning the ground into mud fairly soon, and there's been an imperative to make the running, while the Russian military seems to be collapsing in some areas and more strategically withdrawing in others. Alexei Goncharenko told the foreign policy website this: "For the moment, they are retreating very fast. We can say they are running, trying to create new lines closer to Kherson." So now this is the race between Ukrainians continuing to attack all of them, and them trying to make new defensive lines. President Putin acknowledged the setbacks and suggested that the areas would be stabilised in the short term and all territory would be regained. It's not obvious at first glance how that is supposed to happen. Obviously, the mobilisation of new troops is intended to make some difference, and reports on the ground via Russian social media suggest that a significant number of new conscripts have been given minimal training and then sent straight into Ukraine. Those reports were rather confirmed as Ukraine seized the opportunity to display the first newly mobilised soldier to have been captured. He testified that he travelled to the front line with the intention of handing himself in. He at least did better than at least one of the others, who reportedly tried to surrender only to be shot in the back by his retreating colleagues. But trouble has been hitting even before the new recruits get to Ukraine. In the Belgorod region in the south of Russia, newly mobilised servicemen have been shown in video footage on the Independent Insider website protesting, and they were complaining about intolerable living conditions, their commanding officer's attitude, and the fact they were issued weapons straight from the 1970s. They said they were being treated like cattle and forced to spend a lot of their own money on food and equipment. While that sounds like the mobilisation is unlikely to do anything but add to the scale of human tragedy, to be fair, most systems that start chaotically do tend to improve themselves over time. Now, long-term success might still be limited or non-existent, but you're unwise if you presume that just because there was a bad start. How much time Putin has, of course, is an open question. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Putin is actively setting up Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as a scapegoat for the failures of the war, while trying to build support from other pro-war factions. Shoigu is one of the few people that Putin feels he can actually trust, so it would represent a huge break if he were to be sacked, but things are moving. And this has included the announcement that Putin awarded high-profile war hawk Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov the rank of Colonel General. If Putin had presumed that the annexations would draw a new red line that Ukraine would dare not to cross, he must be particularly shocked that, to the contrary, it's now being reported that senior US officials think that Ukraine may be able to retake Crimea on current showing. This was previously considered to be out of contention on the presumption that Russia would fight vigorously to defend it. It has, after all, occupied the territory for nearly a decade. But recent Russian military collapses seem to make it all possible. The unnamed US official told The Telegraph, "It is clear that Russia no longer has the ability or willpower to defend key positions, and if the Ukrainians succeed in their goal of recapturing Kherson, then there is a very real possibility that it will ultimately be able to recapture Crimea. One should beware of placing too much weight on stories based on coulds and maybes, except to get a sense of where the momentum is and just how desperately cornered Putin may be feeling right now. The sense of alarm will be heightened by the report from the New York Times that US officials believe that parts of the Ukraine government were behind the assassination of Daria Dugina, the daughter of the Russian nationalist Alexander Dugin, who is thought to have been the actual target of the attack. Kiev has always said that it wasn't behind the attack, and it's rather interesting that the wording used was parts of the Ukrainian government, suggesting that maybe some maverick elements were in action, leaving it wholly ambiguous as to whether Zelensky was involved or was even aware of it. And this is the indicator of a possible fault line here. The US officials were similarly reported to be frustrated with Kiev's lack of transparency with them on its battlefield and covert plans, particularly those undertaken on Russian territory. Now, are they actually frustrated, or are they just sending a signal to the Kremlin that they're not directly involved with the incursions into Russia itself? Defence and intelligence officials don't generally just go to the press to whine about their allies in the course of a war. So you should assume they're seeking to achieve specific goals in doing so. Now, if I was Kiev, and particularly since I benefited in the early part of the conflict with whistleblower reports from the other side, I would be similarly very careful what was told to outsiders on intended military manoeuvres. And the US has been kind of famous for not oversharing with its own partners, as recently as the withdrawal from Afghanistan, for instance. But the key question many people are now asking is whether the conflict is going to go nuclear. For all the reasons we've covered, it seems that Russia is losing the war, and yet Putin sees losing as a completely unacceptable option. So desperate times, desperate means. Many are arguing that means we're now closer to a nuclear Armageddon scenario than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I would actually add, personally, I think it'd be the false alarm that nearly had the Soviet Union responding with an all-out nuclear strike in the 1980s, but that's just nitpicking. The threshold used to be set at nuclear, full stop. There should be no use of nuclear weapons. To do so leads inevitably to an all-out exchange which potentially, ends all human life on Earth. But now Russia's been pondering, well, why draw the line there exactly? And you might argue, I haven't seen this pointed out at the time of doing this video, but it seems to me it's an intuitively obvious point for Russia to make, that Western weapons use in Ukraine is logically leading to the use of battlefield nuclear weapons. Because on the day I record this, the news is talking about the latest HIMARS rockets that America's shipping to Ukraine, M3OA1 missiles, which, quote, can devastate huge areas in one blast. That's a little hyperbolic. The blast can hit an approximate radius of 85 metres. They're seen as key to helping the Ukrainians tackle the Russian military where they're dug into better prepared defensive positions, for instance around the south of Kherson city. They're not battlefield nuclear weapons. Even small nukes would be much more powerful and would have all the other negatives such as radiation. But if you're Vladimir Putin, you're looking at the functionality of these weapons about to be used against you, you can very easily, bearing in mind how easily all sorts of arguments come from Russia right now, very easily argue that such escalation in firepower naturally leads Russia to respond in kind, and that leads them there. So why would you go along, if you're them, with a red line that counts out your weapons that could hit the enemy in their entrenched positions, while providing very effective ones to do that to your enemy? Now, it's bad logic. The crossing of that line will be a real global pariah moment. Hopefully China will have been clear to Putin about just that, because nuclear war is not in China's interest as much as anyone's else. But the question is whether Putin cares anymore. He has made clear in the past that he totally identifies himself with the Russian state. He has argued, what is the point of the world if it doesn't have Russia in it? By which he means Russia led by him. The West has gone to great lengths to try to prevent the likes of North Korea and Iran having nuclear weapons on the basis that these weapons shouldn't be in the hands of people actually crazy enough to use them. Well, whoops. Moving from that to a lower level of warfare. We need some light relief after that, after all. So Liz Truss had her lively week at the Conservative Party conference. U-turns were duly performed, for instance on the abolition of a top rate of income tax, the policy that at least partly created the storm in the first place. And after it all, she gave a mostly credited conference speech as leader, which a number of MPs and commentators said hit mostly the right notes, had the added benefit of Greenpeace protesters providing a common enemy to pull the audience onto Truss's side. But all of it's irrelevant, I would suggest. The truth is that the public perception of a government is terrible, and the bad opinion is based on the impression of incompetence, particularly economic incompetence. It's the same perception that once it stuck to John Major's government could not be removed, and since Liz Truss has only a couple of years to play with, it will not be removed from this government either. Research between the 1st and 3rd of October asking people to give their impression of Liz Truss came up overwhelmingly with the word incompetent, untrustworthy, useless, idiot, dangerous, disaster, clueless, awful, poor. The problem Truss and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng created for themselves was that although global events meant that interest rates were going to go up, there would be difficulty for people with mortgages and all of that anyway. The fact that they dived in with a badly judged mini-budget created an economic crisis now pretty much guarantees that most citizens will blame them for all of the problems. And that's an impression that won't go away, so long as those negative impacts are being felt, which they certainly will be for the next couple of years. And it wouldn't go away even if Truss can perform well from now on and rally her party around her to become a united force focused on winning the election, a possibility that almost seemed in the air as she finished her conference speech. But then you remembered that the people who think she's a huge mistake are the ones who stayed away from the conference. The Daily Telegraph, a newspaper read by a majority of Conservatives, reported that a number of MPs are now talking openly about the need to oust her. Even though nothing's likely to come of that in the short term, because it's self-evidently absurd to think you'd immediately hold another election, the sense of decline it gives will stick indelibly. It rather reminds me of when John Major was first elected to become leader of his party and Prime Minister. As he stepped forward to the dispatch box in the House of Commons for the very first time, the famous heckling Labour MP Dennis Skinner called out, "Resign!" That was a joke, it had them in stitches, but it's exactly what Liz Truss is facing for real. So, no. I mean, she did a string of TV interviews, normal for the leader at conference time. Not so normal that, for instance, this would be the first question.
In 18 days then, you announced £45 billion of tax cuts without setting a fiscal framework. It precipitated a £65 billion emergency bond buying programme by the Bank of England to protect pension funds. The pound tanked. 1,000 mortgage deals withdrawn from the markets as interest rates expectations spiked. You established a 33-point lead for Labour in the polls. And now the lady not for turning has announced a massive U-turn on a policy. This is surely the worst start of any Prime Minister.
And that wasn't untypical. Short of President Putin actually attacking Britain itself and having Liz Truss prove to be an astonishingly good wartime leader, it's kind of what happened to save Margaret Thatcher in her unpopular first term, or short of Labour being hit by some widespread and major scandal or miscalculation, I mean, it would have to be of epic proportions, it is hard to see Liz Truss avoiding a rout of the next election, which maybe is a shame. I mean, I do expect her government to be more competent than what came before. Damning with faint praise, you might say. We've already started to see some of the potential fruits with better mood music between the UK and the EU in relation, for instance, to the Northern Ireland Protocol and other areas of common interest. But it won't matter. They will lose. And we will continue to see blow after blow over the coming months and year. For example, this week, one former major Conservative Party donor and supporter, Gareth Quarry, gave up, joined Labour with an initial donation of £100,000 with promises of a lot more to come. As I mentioned last week, Conservatives losing next time doesn't necessarily mean that Labour then has an overall majority. Since it last had one of those, it lost most of its Scotland seats to the SNP, Now, maybe it will win back some of those seats. If it's looking like a real contender, that might improve. But from a standing start, it won't be a huge number. But it should be enough to remove the incumbents. Now, until then, we have a lame duck government purely because of a spectacular action of self-sabotage right at the beginning. Whichever ministers put in place bold policies, doesn't matter, they will be likely reversed again soon. So I mean, for example, what companies really are going to invest in fracking now? Once it's sunk in, that it's almost certain that it will be banned again in a couple of years' time. It's not a sensible investment time frame. If you're a government minister, especially if you're one of the ones that took part in the leadership campaign, are you now trying to do the right thing by the country? Or will you be tempted to manage this period in a way to position yourself as the saviour after an election wipeout? Assuming your own seat survives the apocalypse, of course. So politically speaking, it almost doesn't matter what the weather does this winter. If it's a cold winter, as some forecasters are predicting, then there's a very real chance of blackouts in the UK, especially if we get cold and still weather, since it hasn't been able to build up any large store of natural gas during the summer due to lack of storage capacity. The National Grid warned that households and businesses could be cut off for 3 hours per day if supplies run short. If it's a mild winter, as some forecasters are predicting. Yes, I kid you not. I've seen both predictions, meaning that you might as well really toss a coin. Then that might not happen. But nobody will give the government any credit either way, because it will be bad enough whatever happens, and nobody will think the government did anything to make it better. Liz Truss may take at least some consolation from the fact that the looming winter is causing equal upset and discord in the EU. Germany has been particularly under fire after it announced a €200 billion package of energy support aimed at protecting its citizens and businesses, which has led other EU countries, none of which can match the deep pockets of the German state, to protest. They said that the German state support would distort competition within the bloc in favour of German businesses, and it was unfair, with the citizens of the richest member gaining support that would not be available to all. So that's a key one, and energy is going to remain a huge point of stress and contention for the coming months. But it's not the only one. A number of EU member states have also been calling for a new impact assessment on the European Commission's Farm to Fork programme, which proposes to expand organic agriculture to 25% of EU farmland and to cut the use of pesticide by a set amount. Some of you will recall that I've covered this programme on the channel in the past, noting that the academic studies are mostly in agreement that a shift to organic means lower food productivity per unit of land. A kind of counterintuitive move at a point when food security is at an urgent premium. In August, the Commission concluded an exercise on how countries would each contribute to the legally binding target on pesticide reductions, and some EU members were shocked by the result, because some found they were expected to make cuts of over 60% to reach the EU overall target. Now, a number of states are arguing, not even that this is apparently counterproductive on its face, but that circumstances have so changed in the event of a Russian war on Ukraine, with its huge shockwaves through the global food chain. The Polish Secretary of State, Ryszard Bartosik, said, "For the sake of quality of legislation, I ask the European Commission to carry out a new, reliable impact assessment taking into account the effects of war in Ukraine and to examine the proposed legal solutions." He added that the emphasis should be moved to ensuring food security and preserving food sovereignty, by which I presume he means keeping a significant proportion of food locally grown and reared. This call was backed by countries such as Austria, Spain, Hungary, Romania, and echoed similar concerns from the Agriculture Committee of the European Parliament. On the 31st of August, that committee gave vigorous criticism to the proposals following a presentation from the Commission which completely failed to address the potential impact on yields and food security. At that point, such concerns were dismissed pretty much out of hand. For example, the Health and Food Safety Commissioner Stella Kyriakides said that concerns around food security in the light of the war were valid, But do not make action on pesticides any less urgent. Now that's something of a circular argument, you would think, because you could simply respond that yes, the concerns around pesticide use are valid, but do not make action on food security any less urgent. So a rational discussion has to go beyond that. I'm reminded of the fact that for the major famines of the 20th century, generally weather and climate was not to blame, human policy, malice and or stupidity was. In the face of a recent call, France, Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands opposed delay. The debate is likely to be another one that puts some structural strains on the EU's attempt to hold its cohesiveness. The new regulations are seen as particularly hitting Eastern European countries which have a lot of agricultural land, lower national wealth and less commitment to environmental concerns that drive the Commission's agenda. The EU executive, however, has not yet clarified whether carrying out a new impact assessment is being considered. Maybe they will say one way or the other at the EU summit taking place on the day of shooting this video, although the conversation there again is mostly going to be dominated about getting energy in sufficient quantity and a low enough price. Not everyone, it turns out, is united around the cause of cheaper energy. OPEC, the Organisation of Oil-Producing Nations, which includes, of course, Russia, announced this week that it would be reducing output of oil to boost prices, having seen them falling in recent months due to reducing demand. This was something of an embarrassment for US President Joe Biden, who had gone to Saudi Arabia, eating humble pie as he did after his previous condemnations of the country for human rights abuses, to try to persuade them to expand production instead. Well, with Russia's encouragement, they're doing the opposite. The move immediately saw about a 7% boost to the global oil price, although how long that will last isn't clear, because the truth is that a number of OPEC countries have been producing below target anyway, so the difference in actual output may be less than the headline figure given. But it is an important signal, once again, that it's not the world united, save for a few that are hedging their bets, it is a world divided. Understanding that changes how you see the options ahead of you, which in some ways is a neat bridge to this. A lot of people probably watched Liz Truss as she was subjected to those hostile interviews and then had to come out all guns blazing for her big speech, having been under constant, huge pressure, and they probably thought they were glad it was her and not them. It's easy to agree, to dismiss that pressure as self-inflicted, giving her earlier mistakes. But you know, we all make mistakes. Often we have to face the consequences and work through them. The great tennis player Billie Jean King titled her book, "Pressure is a Privilege." And it's the sort of reframing that comes naturally from sports stars because they spend all of their time practicing, improving, learning, precisely so that one day they will be there in the highest pressure situation. Match point down in the Wimbledon final or whatever, everything hanging on how they play this next point. The great champions are often the ones who play the high pressure points the best, and those are the ones who most embrace that framing. Pressure means the stakes are high. That's what you wanted. You put yourself in that position to win big, to make a difference to something wider than just yourself. Pressure is a privilege. Now, assuming you're not a great athlete, and I know you'll be astonished to learn that I'm not, how does that reframing express itself in an ordinary life well lived? Suppose at the end of the life you had to account for two things. How big were the obstacles you had to overcome to succeed, and how well balanced were your successes and failures? In some way, they're actually the same question, but they're significantly different to how we normally look back at life. Ask a bunch of people, many will say they always want to win, always, and others will say they simply want to be happy. The first group have created an incentive for themselves to lower their expectations. You can always win if you set the bar nice and low. Those great sports champions lost often, particularly on the way up, because they pit themselves against the very best. They wanted the biggest challenges to test themselves against. The second group are chasing butterflies. Basically, happiness is tied to outcomes. It's a byproduct, not an end. But the reframing is on the basis that it's only through a degree of struggle that real quality and achievement is revealed. If encountering and overcoming obstacles was the purpose of life, well, you'd embrace the challenges when they came, because each of them would represent an opportunity, rather than being discouraged because somehow you were led to believe that there would be this easy to walk straight path from your starting point to your desired end points. And then when something happens to throw you off course, you can berate the unfairness of life, how badly done by you've been. So those obstacles should be legislated or shamed out of your way. That's how you get weak. That's how you end up in the mindset that says when a big challenge presents itself, you look for relief, for peace at any cost. Negotiate not to achieve your goal, but to get a quiet life, to avoid pressure at all costs. Convince yourself that vaguely pleasant distraction is the same as being happy. But muscles and challenge waste away. A life without purpose is barely worth the living. People make their own choices, that's how it should be, but you should at least make your choice, understanding what it is that's on offer. We're living in a competitive world, not just at a micro level, but as we've come to realise in the last couple of years, at a macro level as well. You only get one life. Why not use it to seek out the privilege of pressure, knowing that in so doing, you're aiming higher. When you're done, you'll be able to look back at the mountains you climbed with pride rather than with regret about all the things you never dared to do. All right, my thanks as always to the people who support this channel on Patreon. It would be 10 times harder for me to climb this particular mountain without that support. If you would like to add your support for the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content I aim to produce here, please head on over to patreon.com/Mallen Baker. It is always appreciated. Either way, have a great week. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.